Well, back again. Another one of my what do I find interesting about series. I was planning to talk about Wittgenstein. I felt that that was the next logical step. But then I was talking to a friend the other day who has a bit of an interest in philosophy. Hi, Rain, if you do watch this stuff. And I was talking about this series and I mentioned Wittgenstein, and when I was talking to her, I kind of felt that there was a part of the story that I'd skipped. And I find that kind of interesting since actually being doing this series, I've been going back and visiting stuff that I haven't really engaged with heavily. I've certainly thought about and talked about, but I haven't been doing what I used to do when I was actually formally studying it and so forth. And I kind of feel like, looking back, there was a big chunk of stuff that I never really... Kant would be among them. I was a little bit stuck last time because Kant had never really grabbed me. But without Kant in the story and having his view, where I ended up wouldn't have been possible. It was an intrinsic part of my line of thought. There's another part that I kind of feel I've overlooked. So, up until now, we've had this wrestle between early back with Plato and Aristotle and so forth. They were different, but they were looking at the world. Plato was very interested in metaphysics and the world of the perfect and so forth, whereas Aristotle was really interested in nature. And that kind of theme to me has continued. And as I look at rationalism and empiricism, I kind of am noticing, at least from looking at it now, that rationalists on the whole tend to be theological. They're trying to defend or advocate some kind of divine truth or something. You look at Descartes, and he was very much. He said that his proof, way out of his doubt, was that there is a God and that God's good, and he can't doubt that. Kant was very much in the camp of defending his faith or beliefs. Hume was more, he was kind of heading toward atheist, I think. And he was very much grounded in what's happening, what we can see, touch, smell. That's the whole thing of empiricism, is that we don't have innate knowledge. And so it's kind of theistic and non-theistic in a way. I'm still thinking these things through, and it's what I find interesting, and this I find interesting, but I'm now seeing it in that way. And the empiricists are now getting... Kant tried to resurrect the rationalist ideas with his Kant was trying to say that even though we don't know what the world is actually like, it will always appear to us in a certain way. And so therefore we can rely on it being that way. And so we're not just bound by our senses. There are certain things, these categorical imperatives, there are these things that are universally true. And we can know them to be true for us, even if they're not actually true in the world as it is in itself, or the noumenon as he called it. It will be true in the phenomenon, the world that we live in. And there's been this bouncing back and forward. Now, at the time, this was like 1750, 1711 or something, he was born, I think. science is beginning to get going, and we're heading into, Darwin and Newton and these big names in science. And science is getting an ascendancy in that it's bringing about results. We're seeing things like it's heading into the Industrial Revolution and a total transformation of the way that the world is operating. And so empiricism is where we're doing science. It's where we're really, a lot of people doing science were religious, but there's a tendency toward naturalistic answers, and so no longer is everything at God's hand and their elan vital. We live because we have these vital spirits. It's now the ghost in the machine, as Descartes is described as. There's a machine. We are a machine. The world is a machine. And so science is about discovering how this machine works. And, there's things moving forward in chemistry and engineering and so many fields. And empiricism and the use our senses and test everything way of going about it is where you're going to have your outcomes. So we go through a few hundred years where at least the way I see it, there's been an increasing dominance of the empirical, the scientific. Now there's stalwarts still standing on this side, but you look at where the big discoveries are happening and the headlines, and it's over here. Now, good ideas seem to always get taken too far. It just seems to be the way it is. And this is really making some ground over here, and now we're talking, we're coming into the 20th century, and there's an enormous optimism. Science is the answer. There's a lot of people they've kind of turned science into a religion. It's become its own unquestioned truth, and any attempts to deny scientific things is seen as a heresy by those that are in that camp. And so at the turn of the 20th century, there was an enormous amount of optimism that, we pretty well, all science that's going to be done is done, and it's filling out the details. It's this sort of thing that happens over and over again where people get ahead of themselves and they think, well, we've kind of worked it all out. And you look at the number of discoveries and the amount of science that was done from, say, the late 1700s through to 1900, and there was a lot of people sort of dreaming of the new utopia where science has solved everything. And in a sense, prior to this way of looking at the world, if you got sick and you're not doing well financially, or you're troubled, then who is the person you go and see? You go and see a priest, and a priest's over here. A priest is saying that yes, we're born with this thing we're meant to be, and this revelation from God, and we have this known. So if you're doing poorly, you should get right with God, and then God will look after you. And this goes back to the sort of stuff with Aristotelian physics. If you believe that if something is moving, it has to be being moved, so there must be a first mover or a prime mover, then if you want to win the battle, you need to be right with God. If you want to be well, you need to be right with God. But now, this has been a sort of dominant position for a very long time. But now, there's medicine, there's surgeons, there's they've discovered penicillin, there's there's all sorts of things that are happening at this time. And who are the saviour? It's the scientists. Scientists are the saviour. If you're sick, you don't go and see a priest, you go and see a doctor, and the doctor is working in science. If you want your factory to make more widgets, then you go and see an engineer, and engineers will help you. And so there's now a kind of a religious devotion appearing to science, and it's the one that's going to be the saviour. And this is the utopia. And you look at Scientific American, I was subscribed for a while, and they've got 50, 100, and 150 years ago, and you see the stories. And at this point, there's been skirmishes, and there's been problems with Boer wars, and there's been, always been trouble, violence, but we have a very optimistic view, and science is a solution. And now the First World War comes around, and that lost a lot of cred, because it showed that science and mechanised war was not a utopia, it was a hell. And there was war on a scale never seen, a global scale, and there was destruction on a scale never before encountered. There's someone mowing the lawn. There's weaponry on a scale. Now they're dropping bombs. At the beginning of the First World War, there were these rag and wood flying machines, really, and they've got doped paper or cloth, at least, on their wings, and the engines are running with castor oil as a lubricant because it doesn't freeze. So the guys coming out of these planes have got massive diarrhea because they've had castor oil fumes blowing all over them for the last hour or so that they've been up in the plane. I mean, but by the end of the war, there was hundreds of planes involved in dogfights. There's this massive mechanised, systematised war, which is bringing about suffering in a way that's not been seen before. And so while there were still people that were convinced of the utopia, there is genuine doubt starting to come in, and questions are being asked about the validity of this, this thing that promised so much. Now, at least I've been watching some more, there's some very good talks, modern philosophy series on YouTube, and they're talking to some of the foremost thinkers of the last century, and I'm very aware of the limitations of my knowledge, and the fact that I might be not understanding exactly what maybe the technicalities of what these people were talking about. But I guess I have it's what I find interesting, and this is what I find interesting, and these are my thoughts. So with that preface, I think that we see this thread in history where now there's been a massive shift from the priests and the church being the place that you go for solace and you go for healing and so forth. Now you go to the Church of Science, and it's going to make everything great. But there were some big questions that hadn't really been answered about scientific method, about what science is, and I think that something like the First World War and what it brought about really put in place a reason to be questioning these things. Well, there was a group of people, they call themselves a Vienna Circle. They met in Vienna. I watched a little bit about them, but these people came together, and they were in a position where they really buy this, and they want to sort it out. But they think that there's people on this side, they think that they're muddying the waters. There's metaphysics. There's all this stuff about is there a God, and if there is a God, what it's like, and what is morally right and wrong, and we need to look at what God thinks or the religious spiritual writings. And these people, they are hardcore on this side of the thing. They are not impressed by this. And they want to put it to bed once and for all. They want to say, we're getting rid of all this rubbish, this nonsense that these people keep talking about. And so they're buying this big time. They're really committed to this. And so it's this group known as Logical Positivism, the way that they what they advocated. And there is a key statement, and I'll hang on. I need to do a little bit of I need to do a bit of working up. So back again. I've had to move this so I don't get a big reflection here. So if you can read this, this says, for a putative statement to be meaningful, it must be empirically verifiable. I think I forgot the E. B. All right, it must be. Yeah, it can't be my writing if it's not illegible. Must be empirically verifiable. So the key words in here are putative statement, meaningful, must, empirically verifiable. They're the ones that got the clout. So putative statement is a statement that makes a claim about the world. It says something about the world. So really this is one putative statement are linked. So for a statement that is asking a question about or making a statement about making a claim about the world, for it to have meaning, it must be able to be empirically verified. So you must be able to run tests. So if you make a statement and you can't show that there were ways that we can, using scientific method, if we can't verify them using these methods, the statement's meaningless. And by doing this, they have completely, they're saying this is absolutely wiping out this side of the board, because they're making statements about things like God, and you can't do a test to see if God exists by their own, even by the claims over here. God is other. God is transcendent, beyond our testing and knowledge. And a whole lot of questions in morality and ethics and so forth are also beyond a scientific test. So they wanted to just kind of, like, this lot are gone, we've only got this left. Everything is empirical. So A.J. Ayer, and actually you can see videos of him. He's recent enough that there's actually video of him being interviewed, I think. Pretty sure I saw stuff about that. Anyway, Ayer, when he was 25, wrote a book called Language, Truth and Logic. And he basically came forward with this claim. And it was very influential, and at the time there were these people over here really wanted to hear something like that. That was what they were there for. And if you want to believe something, if there's something you want evidence for, and someone gives you something, you're very open to accepting it. And so this was kind of run with, and it led into B.F. Skinner, who was a psychologist, and he said that we can't empirically verify the state of someone's mind and their ideas and their emotions. All we can do, if we do brain scans, we can see that the brain is responding in this way, or if you watch their behaviour. So you can only see the behaviour, but you can't see inside of a person. And since you need empirical verification, you need to run tests. Any statement about why someone might do something, you say someone someone went into the chocolate shop because they like chocolate. This idea of liking chocolate, no, they showed chocolate desiring behaviour. But potentially they could be robots, they could be soulless, they could be zombies. For all we know is our own consciousness and how we feel. And we're the only one, and you can't extrapolate from one, me, to many. So they're sort of saying, well, we have no way of knowing if anyone else is conscious. If we ourselves feel the consciousness, then all we can empirically defend is that I feel conscious, but I can't know you are. So they kind of, Skinner was very influential. But the reason why I didn't really think about this so much as a topic is this statement here, as presented, is a putative statement. This makes a claim about meaningfulness, and this statement can't be empirically verified. So if you evaluate the statement that is kind of the overarching anthem against itself, it fails. Now, of course, some people remained unconvinced by this, but a lot of people kind of went, well, what are we even talking about this for? This can't even stand up to it. This can't even be defended on its own terms. And so the logical positivists had a burn bright, but not for that long. Now, following on from this and the lack of success it was having, and also the positivism in logical positivism, it's really what they were looking for was ways of proving things to be true. They really wanted empirical evidence to say that this must be true. So in the absence of a priori knowledge, we can do enough tests, and it kind of starts to turn into, we now know the laws of nature, and since we've learned them, it's a priori, and yet they're still claiming a posteriori. And it didn't work. It didn't really hang together. But Popper, who was, I could point up there and go, I've got one of his books, like I have on a lot of things. Anyway, what's his book called? Every time I can't ever remember what it means, what it's called, and then every time I said it, I go, of course it is. Objective Knowledge, I think it's called, the one I've got. Anyway, Popper, there it is, Objective Knowledge, right in front of me. Yeah, I'll do it. Here we go. Karl Popper. Yes, Popper changed the game for science because he said we shouldn't try to prove things to be true, we should try to prove them to be false. And so rather than verification or making things verifiable, you try to falsify them. And so you put forward an idea and then you do everything within your power to falsify it. And you publish your data and you get other people who come in and they try to falsify it. And the more times and the harder people have tried and the more ways they've tried to show something to be untrue, because it is possible, at least in theory, it's possible to show things to be inconsistent with themselves and therefore the statement not to be true or the claim not to be true. You only have to find one exception to a rule, or a law, one exception, and it's no longer a law. And so you try to falsify it. And as you go along and move forward, you falsify, but what is left standing, you try and knock it down, and then you find what the strong points are. And so, you want to, I watch a lot of stuff with people fixing old cars because I've got an old car. And so they start, and they just go around and start knocking, and then the rust comes out here, the rust comes out here, rust comes out here, and they go underneath, and there's rust there. But after they've gone around and whacked it all, and pulled all the putty out that's been the bog that was put in years ago and whatever, they see what they got left. And then they work from that place. The things that didn't crumble, the stuff that didn't that the hammer just went through, that's the good stuff. And so science is kind of like that, like the shell of the car, in that you just constantly round knocking to see if this rust is this rust is this rust, and at the end you're left with something that is you've got the stuff that's worth hanging on to. And so Popper, by changing that from verifying to falsifying, he kind of rescued a lot of science from a lot of criticism. But all of this, we're still in our two sides, but I think that it's interesting because as things are progressing and people are, there's stuff that's being built on, and people are becoming more and more specialised and so forth, the nature of the arguments become more technical. Some would like to say more sophisticated, but they're more complex. And also, if it's done well, they become more nuanced. And so we have this situation here where we're still, at this point, I think, we're still holding up sort of these two sides, and I put Karl Popper over this side. But these two here, Popper was influenced heavily, but we got our logical positivism. Positivism. So you can't read it, so that's exactly what I should aim for. It means you have to think to remember. But Popper was around the Vienna Circle, but I don't think, I wouldn't say that he was one of the logical positivists. But this stuff was happening in the 1920s. Around that time also, remember that there was this whole view, well, postmodernism was a term a lot of people have heard, but this is all modernist. And it's working on the assumption that science is a certain sort of thing, and you discover truth in a certain way, and that's this side of the equation. But then around, when people started thinking, well, we've got it all figured out, Einstein came along, and relativity and subatomic physics and the uncertainty principle, and there's nuclear weapons becoming a thing in the 40s. Science was not, they were overly optimistic when they said we've just got to fill in the dots. This was a major upheaval. And so in the face of this major upheaval, you got these interesting little side threads, they were significant really, they're not side threads, but you've got these things like this happening because they're trying to deal with a whole lot of stuff. It was a very dynamic time. There was a lot of discovery, a lot of changes, a lot of things to kind of try and accommodate. So Ayer and Popper had their goes at that. And I feel like this part of the story, for me at least, I'm thinking that from here I can talk about Wittgenstein, but then there's, Popper and Wittgenstein weren't the best of friends, and then there's W.V. Quine and coherentism and so forth. There's still stuff to come, but I think at this point, I was reading this stuff and I was thinking about this stuff, and then I was introduced to Wittgenstein. And on the back of this and the confusion or lack of clarity, this was all, it's like, this is a mess. What can we do? Well, I encountered uncertainty by Wittgenstein, and that gave me a way. I'm not. I have a feeling that if I were able to sit down and have a chat with Wittgenstein and talk to him about what he was actually on about, he would probably. He's pretty famous for mocking people and rolling his eyes and so forth. I think I'd get my eyes rolled out, and well, he look at me and shake his head and go, don't have a clue what I was talking about. But I guess I'm forging my way too, and I don't have to agree with everybody, and you don't have to agree with someone's conclusions or even where they're coming from to be inspired by what they said. And so I would say maybe I'm a neo-Wittgensteinian in that the position that I hold with these things is really grounded in Wittgenstein, but maybe not as Wittgenstein would be comfortable with, maybe not as he intended. But it's this mess where I think that the empiricists are trying to get something of, they still want a bit of this a priori knowledge, but they've rejected it. They've absolutely rejected it. And where does it leave them? Well, it really undermines them. It leaves them without a lot to say. And so they're now declaring that they have laws of nature and that these things are always true and universally true. Well, if that's not buying into a priori knowledge, I don't know what is. But they're doing it from a position, claimed position of empiricism that says we can't know anything before it happens. So I feel like at this point we've got this mixing of all of this. And this idea here had its little moment as attempt, maybe a bit like Kant's attempt to resurrect the a priori knowledge for us, even though it wasn't available universally about the world as it is. At least it's that way for us. So Kant had a go at kind of resurrecting something that he felt had been lost. At least this is the way it seems to me. On this side of the equation, and now people like Ayer and Popper are trying to get something back that they lost from this side. And so, it's not. It is easy to draw up two lists, but by this time it's not easy to just squarely put. I think Hume you can put pretty clearly into empiricism. These guys belong there, but Hume wasn't really. I didn't get a sense when I was reading Hume. He didn't seem to be trying to get a hold of this. He was rejecting it. Whereas these guys have moved on to a point where they realise that they've lost something pretty important, and they're not using the language of a priori knowledge. But I think I talked about analytic and synthetic truths with Hume. They're very much buying into a priori knowledge with logic and with mathematics and the world of pure maths and pure physics, where it's not actually talking about the world, but they kind of want it for the world as well, and it, with where they've put themselves, they don't really have. I don't think they've got a good case to try and get it, and so now at this point, I kind of feel like I may have set the scene well enough to be able to move from here to start to talk about Wittgenstein. So I'll call it there and we'll see how we go. Okay, bye.